This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we'll be talking to multiple award winning author Wanda Morris about her new release, What You Leave Behind. Welcome, Wanda.
Oh, thank you so much, Marie, for having me.
I am absolutely ecstatic to have you here today. Uh, Such a fantastic book. Loved this read. Um, Before we jump in and before I get out of control with all my questions, can you give us a quick overview about the book?
Absolutely. I describe What You Leave Behind as a love story with a few dead bodies thrown in, but it is actually the story of Dina Wood, who has like the grand slam of misfortune. She has recently been fired from her job as a lawyer. She has been asked to leave her home by her husband, who has now divorced her, and she's still grieving the death of her mom. And she returns home to her hometown, Brunswick, Georgia, to kind of lick her wounds and heal from all this despair. And part of her grieving process is to just kind of like drive around the city, um, to kind of clear her head. And one day she lands on the property of an older gentleman, Holcomb Gardner, very expensive oceanfront property where he is living with his dog in a trailer, which is unusual in and of itself. He runs her off the property, thinking that she's there to try and purchase his property. He says he'd never sell it. She leaves, but she can't get him out of her mind. And she returns a week later, and Holcomb Gardner is gone. His dog is gone. His trailer is gone. There's no remnants of him, but there's a for sale sign in front of his property that says it's now up for commercial development sale. And she thinks, what is going on? And unfortunately, Dina's very, very nosy. And she starts to dig around and uncovers a really sinister scheme that takes away property of poor and disenfranchised people. Yeah.
Well, that mystery, as you set it up, we meet him today. He's gone tomorrow. Where did he go and why? If he was someone who never wanted to leave, that was real quick. And it's so insidious, such a simple kind of a setup, but so insidious at the same time. I was hooked immediately. And one of the things that I thought was fantastic was the setting of this story. So many people, will choose to go to Georgia, to go to the Sea Islands up into South Carolina. Many famous stories have been set there. Things have been converted into movies. People know the area. But I don't think that people really get exactly what kind of nuanced culture is in that area. Would you mind explaining a little of that just so we can set the stage for our discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is set in Brunswick, Georgia, and then kind of the surrounding, as you said, sea islands. Here in Georgia, they call it the Golden Isles. And it's kind of like a conglomeration of several little islands. But these were areas that are steeped historically in the culture of the the Gullah Geechee community, as well as just wonderful people who are just trying to live their lives. Um, I set the story specifically chose that particular part of the country because the Gullah community is being decimated by a legal theory called heirs property, where people who die and leave their property without legal disposition through a will or some sort of um, exchange that says, here's what I want to happen to my property. Well, if you die without a will or some disposition, legal disposition, then your property can be inherited by all the people who are related to you. They inherit a fractional share of your property. And all it takes is one person, one heir, who decides they want to sell their fractional share. And in doing so, they can force a court ordered sale of the property. And unscrupulous real estate developers have come in and used that to their advantage. So they dangle a few $1,000s in front of a relative who's, cash strapped. They sell it and then they force the sale of the property. And that's how they acquire very expensive property that they ultimately redevelop.
I was so horrified as you described this in the story, this practice. And unfortunately, we have so many of these laws that exist that most of us don't know about. But the people who stand to gain, they know about them and then some, right? And the fact that these generational inheritances, these ties to family and community that go back, in some cases, hundreds of years. The fact that that's just being torn away by a ridiculous practice, and the heartbreaking part, as you explained in the book, is that people don't even realize this is happening to them until maybe they get a letter in the mail, right?
Right. Exactly. I think the reason why this story tugged at me was because, again, it's the people who can least afford it. We're not just talking about losing your property, we're talking about losing generational wealth that could pass down to your family. So when the property is taken, that means your children and their children and their children after them lose the benefit of that property. And that's generational wealth. That means that's something that could change someone's life, right? That is wealth that could send children to college or help someone buy more property. And it just seems so ridiculously unfair to me. Um, it's interesting because I I got the genesis for this story like years ago. It had to be, I want to say 2017, 2018, something like that. And I was just at home folding laundry in my bedroom watching the evening news. And the reporter is interviewing a woman whose home had been destroyed by Hurricane Florence, I believe it was. I think it went through South Carolina. And she was describing how she couldn't get access to FEMA funds because she couldn't prove that this home was hers. She couldn't prove that a house that she had inherited from her parents and it had been passed down from the parents before. The house had been in her family for generations, but because it had passed down always without a will, nobody could point up and show a deed or will or something that demonstrated that they own this house. And I just thought that's just insanity to me, right? That people who have worked hard to better their lives and the lives of their children now, because they can't demonstrate it. And think about the people who are most affected by this. They're usually people who don't have access to lawyers and accountants and estate planning professionals that could help them set up all the resources that they need to protect their property right. So it all just seems so inherently unfair to me. And even though I didn't start writing this book back then, that story just stayed with me. And every time I thought about it, I'd like do a little bit of research. Because even though I'm a lawyer by training, I didn't practice in this area. So I didn't know very much about it. The extent of my knowledge about it was really what I learned in property law in first year of law school, right? But it just seems so inherently unfair to me. And you know, you're a writer, you know how we are. We write about those things that we care about, those things that make us, you know, twist and stay restless in the middle of the night. And that's how this book came about.
That concept of a lawyer and what a lawyer knows and people having access. Lawyers cost money, you
Mhm.
know, drafting a will and a trust.
Yep.
Yes, there's lots of online services now, but you don't have the benefit of a legal consultant or a legal consult in that process. And that divide of the haves and have nots.
Mhm.
I thought it was so great that the protagonist, Dina, is
Mhm.
like you, an attorney. Um, but like you, that's not her area of expertise.
Right.
But she knows how to get to resources. And that, in and of itself, even though she came from this area, she has had the benefit of being able to learn how to research, how to get what she needs, how to use
Mm.
networks, how to do all of these things. And I thought it was so great that you made an amateur sleuth in this case, the attorney, and so much of what she's doing. Those skills that she learned as an attorney are really showing you how valuable just research and all of that you kind of learn coming up through the academic stage of it and then do by trade, how important that is, just in even to protect yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the thing about Dina as a character is she she is at a point in her life where she's really, really broken, right? She has had all this stuff thrown at her, and now, you know, somebody asks her for help, or even she wants to help somebody, but she feels like, I am not in a position to do this. This is not my fight. This is not what I am supposed to be doing. But yeah, even in the midst of, you know, her background as a lawyer, there is still something that she does not know. And all of it, I think, makes her a more interesting character, right? Because, you know, she has the knowledge, she can dig around and find this, and yet she doesn't want to really. She's kind of like, I can't get involved. I'm too wrapped up in my own problems right now to help someone with hers. But that becomes the thing that saves her, right? Once she does dig into this, she gets into a world of trouble. And it is in that process of trying to help someone else out that she actually helps herself.
And that one of the most beautiful parts of the story. Poor Dina. I mean, you threw everything in the kitchen sink at this poor woman. You know, the divorce. Her husband is, oh, for the love of Pete, he is
Oh,
just the
God.
worst of the worst. Um, their divorce, the terms of their divorce, all of that, just on its own would have been an absolutely horrifying, devastating process to go through. Um, the loss of her mother is something that
Mm,
is so visceral with her every moment. And I think
mm,
anyone who's experienced a close, serious loss like that knows how you just become unmoored.
yeah.
And even things like going to the grocery store can be such an out of body experience, you know. And here she is, this strong woman who had this big job and she's doing all of these things, and she had thought she was checking a lot of the ideal boxes, right? She's got the marriage, she's got this, she's got that. And
Mhm.
it's almost as if, for as bad as those things are, sometimes, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, doesn't it feel like sometimes the worst things that happen to us are the best things in ways?
Oh, absolutely, right? it's almost like a gift. I often think now, because I'm older and I have the benefit of, both a little bit of wisdom and a lot of hindsight, that I look back on those things, even something as innocuous as like a first boyfriend. And, that first breakup, and you're just like, oh my gosh, he ripped my heart out. It was a gift because you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, one of us would be dead, me or him. Right? It's like, it was a gift. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, for Dina, she, really is struggling, like, with the grief and the loss, because she has loss in so many forms, right? And I don't think it's a spoiler. But when she returns home to live in her dad's house now as an adult, her dad has remarried her mother's best friend. Like, right?
And it wasn't just he remarried her, but this happened really, really close. I
Really,
mean,
really
really close.
fast.
Like it
Yes.
wasn't a hot minute. So, I mean, you really, really, really put the screws to poor Dina. How this
Right.
woman did it, I do not. God bless her. She is an amazing woman.
Right, so it's like, not only do you lose your mother, and now you have this other woman in there trying to replace her. It's like, where are we going with this? So I think all of that is to say that loss in, whatever form it comes to, I'm not saying it's a gift, but it's something that we have to process and get through. And once we get on the other side, because I think grieving is not something that you do and then you're done. I think you always kind of have that loss. Um, but once you kind of get to the other side where life starts to feel like you can walk through it again, um, it's then in those moments that you can look back and you can learn from it. And I'm hoping that that's what comes across with Dina, that it was a
I didn't
horrific
get that.
set of
Could you try again?
circumstances, but Siri, a horrific set of circumstances, but in the end, she got through it. And not only did she get through it for herself, she actually wound up helping someone else through their pain and their loss. And that's kind of the best result, I think.
And I kind of felt like, and it's something that I've kind of learned on my journey too, that sometimes when things happen to you, again, for Dina, she kind of had everything that everybody wants when they've got their
Mhm.
list of boxes that they want to check. And now all of a sudden she doesn't have the big job and the big life anymore. She's back in the bedroom she grew up in the little small town. And like you said, there's this other gal in the kitchen. Uh, it's really sometimes those situations rip off just by the nature of the loss, the nature of how devastating things can be. It rips off our blinders and
Yeah.
forces us to confront things that maybe we just went along with for a long time or chose
Mhm.
to perceive, whether it's family relationships, whether it's career relationships. We choose to sometimes stay in our tunnels and in our lanes. And
Right.
sometimes when those big mix ups happen, all of a sudden the light comes in and we see a lot more around us.
Indeed, indeed, right. And that's a really great observation. You get my book. That's a really great observation, because what I was trying to convey is that she, returned home thinking that she would just kind of be in this cocoon and not even realizing the value of her community, right? Something that we tend to take for granted. Like, she always thought, well, yeah, that's just, the people that live down the street. That's just the lady that lives around the corner. And it's only when she comes home in the midst of all this loss, like you said, the blinders fall off. And she's like, wait a minute, this is where I grew up. These are the people who, care about me, even if they don't know me. This is my community. Of course I have to help. Yeah.
And that was one of the, again, getting back to the start of this conversation about the Gullah Geechee culture and this
Mhm.
sense of community and this sense of interconnectedness. Um, you know, Dina had pulled herself away and disconnected to a large degree. Yes, she'd come home and visit, but she wasn't a living, breathing part of that community anymore. And
Mhm.
in just her first question, where'd this guy go? Where
Yeah.
did he go? And caring, because sometimes we go to big cities and we don't see our next door neighbor for 3, 4 months. We don't know if he's in his house. We don't know, what happened. And maybe we don't talk to him, whatever it is. And lots of times we don't know who lives 2 blocks over.
Yeah.
No idea who those people are, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's so funny you mentioned that about this interconnectedness. Dina, when she initially gets home, she feels kind of lost. And there is a Gullah saying that a person can be kind of come ya from ya, meaning that you're from here, but then you're kind of from somewhere else. And that's the way Dina was because, after she graduated high school, she went flying out the door to find some place other than to be in this small town, right? She wanted to, be somewhere, bigger and larger. But still she was part of this Gullah community. She was Geechee, and she proved it by the way she interacted and the way she was dogged in her persistence to get to the bottom of this. I often describe the story, like I said at the top of this conversation, it really is a love story, right? So you have the love story between some of the characters in the book, because even Dina, might have a chance at something like that. Her father, but you also have this love story between the Geechee people and the land and the water that they are so tied to through descending. Because understand that, you know, Gullah Geechee people are direct descendants from formerly enslaved Africans that were brought to this country. So they are tied to this land that their ancestors toiled over. And it's a very important part of this community. And so it really is kind of a love story on several different levels.
And I got that so many times that my heartstrings were constantly pulled, and you were constantly challenging the reader to look at ourselves, look at our communities, and to see things in a different way. And really, Dina's story, I look at it as, yes, there's tragedy, but there's so much blessing. And it,
Mm.
in that way, it mirrored to me the setting, right? Because that is an area where there's so much beauty and so much blessing, but it's also rooted deeply in some very dark tragedy that still continues to this day in
Yeah.
various different ways, insidious ways, dark little tendrils, things that are laws and legal that are still abusing people horribly.
Exactly.
And I
I
just,
am grinning from ear to ear, Marie, because you so get my book. You so get exactly what I was trying to convey. Yes, that everything you said. Chef's kiss. That's absolutely right.
well, I absolutely loved it. I loved Dina as an amateur sleuth. The way you so tightly plotted this, there was not one scene where you were like, oh, okay, well, that was a scene, but everything was that engine driving and driving, running down the track. And the clues that you gave us, how you played them out, the villains, oh my goodness, people are going to love your villains. They are Stephen King in horror creates the same type of level of villainy. That horror, evil, supernatural sadly does exist in all of us. And you tapped into that so well and you pulled it right out. And it kept me up at night, some of those characters. Um, you're such a beautiful visual writer, and the looks on their faces sometimes as they would do things, they would deliver a certain line. It was so powerful. Hairs up on the arm so much in this throughout
Thank
this read.
you.
So thank you for
Thank you
all of
so
that.
much for that. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, you know what? I try to, how do you describe it? Some people, some writers, I've heard some writers say, oh, yeah, I hear the characters talk in my head. I don't necessarily hear characters talk in my head, but I certainly do see where they are. Like, I kind of close my eyes and I can see Dina in that little bungalow with her dad and her stepmom. And she's like, oh gosh, who's in the bathroom now? I want my own bathroom. It's like, and so with this book, the place where Dina worked was very, very visual to me. The oceanfront property where Holcomb Gardner was living in his trailer. Like I said, I don't hear those characters, but I certainly see what they see, and I try to put that on the page for the reader, because whether it's you know beautiful live oak trees dripping in Spanish moss, or it's a villain who's chasing her down a street, I want the reader to be there the way I was. Yeah, so I try to make sure that I do that for the reader.
I will say, for anyone who hasn't been to that part of the country, not only do I highly recommend it, but
Mhm.
this book is, if you can't get there, read this book. What you just said, the trees dripping with Spanish moss, the water lapping against the shore gently, being able to see some of the sea islands from the shore. All of that is so powerful. And you wove the most beautiful tapestry for us.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you a million times over for this book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Marie. Thank you.
And I will say, just for anyone who hasn't been, in South Carolina, they do the Gullah Festival every
Mhm.
year, right?
Yep. Highly recommend. Yeah, I've heard lots of good things. Yeah.
And that culture is so fascinating. A lot of the spirituality elements to it, the belief in the haints, and even how haint paint figures into the architecture everywhere, right? With the homes and everything.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
absolutely, absolutely an amazing part of the world, an amazing look into
Mhm.
that part of the world.
Yeah, I agree. I started going there because I'm originally from Ohio. But I started going down to Southern Georgia to the coast, just like long weekends and vacations, very early in my marriage to my husband, before we had kids. Um, and it has been the kind of place that we return to all the time. We are down there at least 2 or 3 times a year, because it is just this beautiful, stunningly beautiful area of the country. But to your point, the people are so warm and welcoming, and the culture is so vibrant and lively, and um, full of, spirituality and music and food and all these things that, weave together to make you feel like you are home away from home. So yeah, I'll be down there in August, and then I'll be down there again around the winter months. We usually try and take a little trip down. So I just love that part of the country. Yeah.
Absolutely magical. Um, your book was magical. One question I wanna ask before I let you go.
Mhm.
The title of the book, What You Leave Behind.
Mhm.
As an author, what do you, Wanda, want to leave behind?
I want to leave behind a legacy. Um, and for me, that means a legacy in several forms. Not only do I want to leave the seeds of generational wealth for my children, but I also want to leave them a wealth of love and encouragement and wisdom. And that comes about in how I interact with them as well as how I interact with other people in the world. Because even though your kids, you think they don't listen to you, they're listening. They're listening and they're watching. And that's why it's always important for me to just live my truth, right? And be the best version of who I am. And so, yeah, I am always thinking about, my kids and what I leave behind for them. I think that's why I write, because I want to leave a body of work that they can look to and say, oh, yeah, now I know who she is, my mom, but I also know who I am, because I think we are all a part and parcel within our books. Yeah. Great question.
It's your title and your story. That was an absolutely beautiful answer. It represents the beauty inside of you, the artist inside of you, the mom inside of you, the human being, and all of that is found in this book. And I just can't recommend it enough. But I'll stop my gushing. And for those who already love you, Wanda, for those who haven't discovered you yet, where's the best place for folks to find out what you're doing and what's going on for you?
Absolutely. So if you head over to my website, wandamorriswrites.com, you can see all my books. You can find places to buy them as well as my events. There's an events page, and I'm doing a summer book tour. So if you're anywhere near me when I'm out there, please, please come out. I love, love, love engaging with readers.
And I know you are absolutely amazing on social media. In fact, this morning I was on Instagram and got to hear a wonderful Gullah Geechee musical. Is that a band or is it just the solo artist that you posted the music?
Oh, that playlist? Is that
Yeah,
what you
that was playing with
Yeah.
on what you had posted on your story on Instagram.
Yeah, yeah. So each book that I write, I always compose a playlist. I just hop over to Spotify, and songs that remind me of a character or inspire a scene in the book, I just drop it into the playlist. And so I put together a playlist for this book as well. And there's all sorts of music on there: blues, pop. They're the Georgia Sea Island singers who are Gullah Geechee, that sing the traditional music, blues, classical. So yeah, yeah, head over to it. You can find it on my website, wandamorriswrites.com. And there's a button and you click it and you can go straight to the playlist for each of my books.
Absolutely awesome. The immersive experience. The book was immersive, but you're letting us continue to savor it. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for joining me today, Wanda.
Aw, thank you for having me. This has been such a treat, Marie.
It absolutely has. And thank all of you, and my thanks go out to all of you who joined us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.